Sinclair Broadcast Group is a right-leaning group, to say the least. It owns the most amount of television stations in America. And they recently put out a memo to their staff saying, you must read well, of course, they didn't call it propaganda, but that is exactly what it is, as you'll see in a minute. The news stories that we give you. Now, these stories almost all support Donald Trump and his politics. And in this one particular case, they actually talk about fake news, or what they're calling fake stories. And they're trying to say that the rest of the media is biased. Now, they're getting the media to devour itself. They are forcing their local news anchors, and these are what are called must-runs. I'll explain more about that in a second. They're forcing their local news anchors to tell you to not trust the news. That's amazing. This is one of the most audacious examples of propaganda I have ever seen in any country. So Deadspin did a wonderful job of splicing together the different local newscasts throughout the country. And again, remember, Sinclair owns more TV stations than anyone else in the country, and they're about to do a merger where they buy even more, 40 more stations. So this is the propaganda they're putting out all across the country. They make all of their anchors say this. Now watch.
Hi, I'm Fox San Antonio's Jessica Headley.
And I'm Ryan Wolf.
Our greatest responsibility is to serve our Treasure Valley communities,
the El Paso, Las Cruces communities,
Eastern Iowa communities,
Mid-Michigan communities.
We are extremely proud of the quality, balanced journalism that CBS 4 News produces.
But
we are concerned about the troubling trend of irresponsible, one-sided news stories plaguing our country.
The sharing of biased and false news has become all too common on social media. More alarming, some media outlets publish these same fake stories without checking facts first.
The sharing of biased and false
news has become all too common on social media.
More alarming, some media outlets publish these stories simply aren't true without checking facts first.
Unfortunately, some members of the media use their platforms to push their own personal bias and agenda to control exactly what people think. And this is extremely dangerous to our democracy.
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 Indeed, it definitely is. So we find out a lot of things through this one issue and how Sinclair has done this. And this is not the only issue that they've done right-wing propaganda on. I'll give you some examples in a second as well. Again, if you want to watch the full link and the full article, click down below to Deadspin's original article on this. They did a wonderful job with this. I can't commend them enough for putting that video together. So number one, we see political correctness here. Now, you might think political correctness is a term used to say that you shouldn't state offensive things. No, that's a twisting of the phrase used here in America by the right wing. Political correctness was something that was literal, and actually both the fascist Germans, otherwise known as the Nazis, and the Soviets under Stalin used the phrase political correctness. They would tell not only people in government, but people in news, you are not allowed to report what you think is factually correct. You must report things that are politically correct. So the government has an opinion, that is the correct opinion, and you will report it as such. There's never been a better example of it than what you just saw. Again, the right wing does projection. They accuse the left wing of political correctness, and the minute they have an opportunity, they define the phrase. They do it so over the top that you don't need any other examples of it. Okay, so it's political correctness, it's clearly propaganda, but there's a devastating second part that people are not talking about, which is that this exposes local news for the actors that they are. And unfortunately, that's true in all the TV stations. Burgundy will read anything put in the prompter. So you see, and that's why I call television news anchors news actors. We don't have a prompter here. There, they put it in the prompter, and sometimes it's real news people who work really hard, oftentimes it is, to produce a story and then put it in the prompter, and then the anchor reads it. A lot of those anchors worked in the past in the field and gathered up enough expertise to become anchors. Some of them just looked the part, and they got promoted up for a variety of reasons, right? But as you see that, you realize, oh, with the different intonations and the different delivery, the different acting schools they went to in a sense, and that's what these consultants at the local TV stations do. They come in and they teach people that are supposed to be in news how to act the news. And then some with the concerned faces, if you noticed. It is dangerous to our democracy. Now, don't get the wrong idea. A lot of the people who did this, they're not at fault. It's their bosses who literally ordered them to read it. And it is deeply embarrassing to them, but someone writes the script. In this case, it is this group that is admittedly right-wing and clearly supports Donald Trump. In other cases, it's other people writing the script. But what you see on television, unfortunately, is overwhelmingly fake. Now, more specifically to this problem, obviously, some people who worked at Sinclair and a ton of local news people, of course, have, because once again, they're the largest TV group in the country. And people who currently work there are deeply dismayed by what's happened. So first, let's go to Bill Mulligan. He used to work at Sinclair Broadcast Group. He now works at a different station in Los Angeles. He said, they were awful, and I would never work for them again. What they're doing now is ridiculous propaganda, and it's an embarrassment to the profession. I feel for my former colleagues being forced to read this garbage. So he is obviously very clear, but it's easier for him to say that because he doesn't get a paycheck from them right now. And you might think, oh, people on TV make a lot of money, and on cable news, they generally speaking do. But at local news, especially in the smaller and mid-sized markets, they do not make a lot of money. Ben Mankiewicz, who's on this show, started in local news and made $19,000 in his first job in Charleston, South Carolina. And that is not abnormal, and the prices have not gone up very much since then. And so it is hard for them to let go of that paycheck. It's easy for us sitting here to say they shouldn't do it, but then they are going to suffer economic devastation. And already their salaries are incredibly low in most of the markets that you just saw, okay? Now let's go to a current employee at Sinclair. He says, it sickens me the way this company is encroaching upon trusted news brands in rural markets. As you can tell, I'm a little skeptical about the trusted news brands part. I think local news often does a lot of preposterous things, and I don't know why they speak the way that they do. The number of ambulances have doubled, but so have the number of accidents. Why are you talking like that? But for the people who did work hard, and there are plenty of them, there are thousands of people who worked hard and actually care about the news, and that's why they went into the profession. Now, in order to receive a check and to stay at your job, you must read this propaganda, and yes, that of course is deeply troubling. An anonymous local anchor continues that he feels bad because they're seeing these people they've trusted for decades tell them things that they know are essentially propaganda. Now, they literally had a former RT employee, a Russia Today employee, help with one of these stories on Sinclair that was then broadcast all throughout the country. They do two different things. One is they do these prepackaged pieces which they force the local stations to run. They own them, right? They're not really news, but they're put into the news shows. The second thing is they force the anchors to read them like you just saw in that video. Now, I don't care that they use a former RT employee, that's not that interesting to me. But in the midst of that, Newsweek reported that Columbia Journalism Review had described Russia Today as, quote, the Kremlin's propaganda outlet. Well, I've talked about this in the case of RT and Al Jazeera. People are right when they criticize them and say, hey, they're owned by Russia in the case of Russia Today. and Qatar in the case of Al Jazeera. And so you should be wary, especially if they're talking about those particular countries or their agendas. I think that both outlets have at times done very good journalism and at times have done propaganda, no question about it. Now, how about the people that own our stations? See, that's uncomfortable, so people don't like to talk about that. Do employees at Comcast support positions of Comcast? To say 99% of the time is probably a bit of an understatement. And the same is true of Time Warner and Disney and Sinclair. Now, in this case, is it fair to say that it is the US government, the Trump administration's propaganda outlet? Well, you just saw it with your own eyes. It's more than fair. So we throw a lot of stones in America at foreign outlets, and I understand why, and oftentimes I agree. But we should also be aware that we live in a glass house, and in the case of Sinclair, a very transparent glass house, as we all see now. Let me go to another Sinclair Broadcast Group employee. He says this is about whether they have the option to run them or not. I mean, if you're under some illusion that these news anchors can say whatever they want, and if they see that copy, go, well, that's not really news, so I'm not reading it because I'm a news professional. Let me unfortunately get rid of that notion in your head through this employee that says that they have a quote from him or a memo from him, and here it is. He says, let me be absolutely clear here. These, and it's capitalized, all caps, must run. If they do not, my job is on the line. I don't say that to scare you by any means, but I do say this so you understand how serious Sinclair Broadcasting Group is about this project. Propaganda 101. Now, the boss is pleased, and of course by the boss in this case I mean Donald Trump, who they are serving. So Trump tweets out in their defense, so funny to watch fake news networks among the most dishonest groups of people I have ever dealt with criticize Sinclair Broadcasting for being biased. Sinclair is far superior to CNN and even more fake NBC, which is a total joke. Okay, well, this is ironic. Trump talks about fake news, tells his allies they should call other stations fake news. Sinclair does a report about how all the other media does fake stories to help Donald Trump. And Trump comes out and tweets and goes, well, look at how right Sinclair is. They're not the biased ones. You guys are the biased ones for running fake news. So it's a self-perpetuating propaganda cycle. And this is how brainwashing is done on a mass scale. Finally, I want to go to this report from Newsweek to give you context on what else they're doing. Among the must-runs, Sinclair forces on its stations are commentary from former advisor to President Donald Trump, Boris Epshteyn, some of Epstein's latest bottom line with Boris segments, including a story that criticizes the March for Our Lives demonstrations against gun violence, and a place on why the White House's high turnover rate isn't necessarily a bad thing. And the list goes on and on. Sebastian Gorka, one of the top defenders of the president, often goes and does these news segments on Sinclair Broadcasting Group. He literally did one on the deep state. So look, there are actual deep states in different countries at different times, but now there is a conspiracy theory among the right that there's deep state planning to do a literal violent coup of President Trump. Alex Jones says they're going to drop a 2,000-pound bomb on the White House. So these kind of lunatic conspiracy theories, Sinclair Broadcasting Group puts in a nice little package, has the president's former advisors, Gorka and Epstein, read them, and then they put it into the news hours in all of those different outlets all across the country. It is getting the media to attack itself. It's almost a forced mass media suicide. And yes, over there it looked like a hostage video, but that is what they do. They read what's in the prompter. In the case of Sinclair Broadcasting Group, if you don't know which of your stations in your market is one, look it up. It's very easy to find out. Just Google it. You'll know which ones they are, and be wary of what they're reading off the prompter, because it was written by political hatchet men for Donald Trump. What you just watched was one of the videos that we do today, but we actually do a whole 2-hour show every single day. It's a podcast. You could watch it in video or listen to it as audio. You can download it, you can stream it, and you get it completely ad-free if you could become a member of the Young Turks. tytnetwork.com/join.